Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the AFTO Cannabis, Hemp, and Natural Psychedelics Committee webinar series. We are currently on episode 8, where we will be discussing one plant, one framework, a unified effect-based standard for cannabis regulation. And before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. The AFTO webinar disclaimer states that the views and opinions expressed during this virtual event are those of the presenters and not necessarily of the Association of Food and Drug Officials. Participation in the virtual event does not necessarily constitute an endorsement of the speaker's views, products, or services, and this virtual event cannot be used to train AI models. So let's welcome all of our speakers for today. We have Dr. Rachel Knox, Dr. Del Potter, Jessica Montagna, and then myself. And so we'll go ahead and get started. And let me just introduce Dr. Rachel Knox. She is a physician and endocrinologist based in Portland, Oregon, trained in family, integrative, and functional medicine. She has spent her career where cannabinoid medicine, health equity, and evidence-based regulation meet. She is the past chair of the Oregon Cannabis Commission, a founding board member of the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition, and the author of Beyond False Choices, a framework for regulating cannabis by its effect rather than its origin. She co-founded Drs. Knox and the American Cannabinoid Clinics, two of the earliest clinician-led cannabinoid medicine practices in the country, and DK Technologies, home to Abena IHR. She is also co-founder and president of ACAM, the Association of Comprehensive Health Equity and Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Knox.
Thank you, Twee. And thank you everyone for having me. I'm going to go off video now for bandwidth issues and share my screen. It's more than once I have stalled, just doing too much on my net. Okay, here we go. Right. So I want to start by simply stating that nobody in this room wrote the rules that we have to enforce. I didn't write the rules that governed me in my clinical practice. We inherited them. All right, so I want us all to put an arm's length between what the rules are and who we are. I want us to divorce our identity from what is. And I'm not going to spend the next 20 minutes or so convincing you that cannabis policy is broken. We hear that all the time. We know that. So instead, I'm going to show you the specific place where it breaks and why it's not fixable by just adjusting the current rules, right? By this sort of patchwork approach that we have to fixing and changing session after session. Okay. And what I will present is what a framework looks like that sorts the plant the way you would sort anything else we regulate. And so by the end of my portion today, we'll have this sorting rule that you can actually apply, functionally apply, through a tool that I will share with you that will tell you where your own state and even our federal government sits against it, it being this one framework. All right, so in 4 parts, my fellow panelists and I will present one argument. I have the framework, and I'll be framing why regulation origin fails, regulating by origin fails, and what replaces it. Dr. Potter will discuss keeping the plant in the public domain and the countdown to enclosure. Jessica will present the federal picture and what is actually moving on what timeline, and Twee will close us out on the process authority model. All right. Now, every fight in cannabis policy gets framed as one of 3 choices: hemp or marijuana, intoxicating or not, or natural and synthetic. And every one of these is a legal or regulatory category. Now, one of them is a pharmacological one. And every single stakeholder in this fight, in this big arena around hemp and cannabis policy, is partly right. They really are. They're partly right in their plight. Public health is right that we have unregulated intoxicants on gas station shelves. Patients are right that they're priced out of their own medicine. Farmers are right that they were told to plant a crop and then the rules keep changing around them. Cannabis operators, they're right also that they are disproportionately regulated and restricted compared to their hemp counterparts. And that list goes on. And in their plight, all are correct because they are all trapped inside the same irrational web of frameworks that can't be made rational no matter who wins. Now, I believe this is a room that has met all of these products. We have our THCA flower. This is legal on the shelf because Delta-9 tests under the 0.3%, until someone applies heat and the THCA converts to that Delta-9. We have the gummy, and gummies might have a substantial amount of Delta-9 per dose, but it's compliant by weight because the threshold measures concentration in the plant and not the dose in the product. And then we have converted cannabinoids. Now, as an endocannabinologist, I've managed a lot of patients who choose to use cannabis. And I've studied the physiology of the endocannabinoid system and the endocannabinoid dome and understand the pathways of dysfunction that lead to disease, many of the common diseases we treat in clinic, very hard to treat, based in clinic. And I can tell you, the body's receptors do not know or care where the molecule came from, whether it was synthesized from CBD or not. The bottom line, these cannabinoids are pharmacologically active, and it's about appropriate use, right? And then we have CBD itself. And I want to be really precise here because this gets said wrong constantly and it drives me nuts. CBD is not non-psychoactive. CBD is psychoactive. It acts on the nervous system when it treats a seizure disorder, reduces anxiety or depression, and when at high doses, it sedates. What CBD is liable to impair at high doses. It is psychoactive, but it's non-intoxicating. And those are two different claims, whether something is psychoactive and whether one's intoxicating. And confounding them has done real damage. And none of these are edge cases, right? This isn't random. These aren't outliers. These are the routine ones. We cannot rationally regulate a molecule by which cultivar it came from, right? Which plant it came from. Chemistry does not work that way, and neither does public health. And this is what this costs. Regulating the same compound, the same dose, same delivery form under agriculture or food and drug or a liquor regulator, depending only on which plant fiction it came from, right? Hemp, marijuana. 2, policing the wrong variable. This 0.3% measures botanical origin at harvest, but tells us nothing about what the finished product does to the person who takes it. Now, 1 and 2 here are just 2 of many seams that create escape routes for unregulated intoxicating products. These products did not flood the market despite the rules. They flooded it through the gap that the rules created between 2 frameworks. So yes, I will say it. We've been doing this all wrong because we've been asked to enforce the distinction analytical chemistry just does not support, will not support, cannot support, will never support. That is an enforcement failure. Excuse me, it's not an enforcement failure. It's a statutory failure. And why this is urgent rather than merely a nuisance, because this has been a nuisance for probably the decades that all 4 of us have been, working to bring rational policy to the floor. But it's not merely a nuisance now because 3 things are moving federally. On face value, these 3 may look like separate stories, but they are one. And after you hear Del and Jessica talk too, you'll see more and more why this is one story. Schedule 3 sorts operators by federal registration rather than by what they make. On November 12th, the statutory definition of hemp will shift permanently to a total THC standard. This is codified in law. It has its own effective date. We're waiting to see if there's a 30-day pushback on this date, but as of now, it's still November 12th, I believe. And then we have the first patented whole plant drug moving through the FDA pipeline. There is a whole plant drug that has been given breakthrough status here in the United States and is on target to be FDA approved here probably around 2028. Okay. So when we piece these things together, they produce a very narrow, patent protected, high cost lane. And while that's happening, there's being built a fence around everything outside of that. Okay, Del and Jessica, like I said, will go further into detail on this, but I mention it because what I'm about to show you is not a reform proposal for a calm moment. This is not a calm moment. So hemp and marijuana are terms we defined and codified for legal purposes and then started treating as botany. Cannabis sativa L is one species of plant and it bifurcates rather naturally by end use. And so when we do that, regulating gets simple by asking two questions. Question one, is the plant grown for cannabinoid use or for fiber, grain, seed, and stalk? If the answer is no, go to the right here. This is industrial cannabis. This is what we've traditionally referred to as hemp before we knew that we could pull cannabinoids out of it for this big, CBD craze. Fiber, grain, seed, and stalk can all be regulated under current agricultural standards that already exist and never classified by Delta 9 concentration because concentration is not what makes it industrial. Why do I say that? Well, let's answer the first question as a yes. Grown for cannabinoid use? Yes. This is herbal cannabis. Herbal cannabis is the fresh or dried flower and leaf intended for cannabinoid consumption or use. And this is not new coinage. It might be unfamiliar to us here in the United States, but this is actually international convention. And internationally, herbal cannabis just is, irrespective of cannabinoid content. So right then and there, the argument against the 0.3% line is existing international convention. We are simply proposing that the United States stop being the outlier, right? So once that's settled, this is what question 2 does. Okay, so once we're inside this herbal track, we ask a second question. What is the intoxicating potential at the labeled dose? If a product doesn't have intoxicating potential, it can be pushed through general retail, including pharmacies, tested and labeled like any other wellness product. An intoxicating potential, right? This goes through licensed specialty retail shops like we have now with our dispensary models. This is age-gated, tested, labeled. This is the sorting line. There's no threshold here. There's no hemp versus marijuana fiction. There's no synthetic versus natural divide. We can now talk about one plant and one supply chain with operators licensed by what they actually make. And so with effect-based classification as the spine, 5 more commitments make it a framework. Keeping the plant in the public domain, producing the plant to a common national standard. Right now, states can't interoperate. They can't operate with one another if descheduling happened, if through interstate compacts, states start moving, product across their lines because they don't maintain a common standard. What works here in Oregon, where I'm at, might not fly in California. These states are right next to each other, but they can't communicate because we have a different standard for testing and labeling and very costly to fix. Okay. Next, establishing infrastructure around medical use, protecting civil rights and resolving past harms, and all regulated under one coordinating authority. Now, I want to pause on medical use as infrastructure for a moment because most audiences have never heard it framed this way. And I got to tell you, in many a conversation with very, very smart people, this is really hard to unpack. There is no such thing as medical cannabis. There is only the medical use of cannabis, meaning I'm using cannabis for a medical purpose, for a therapeutic purpose. This distinction matters immensely because when you treat medical as a product category, you build a separate silo, a whole market with quote unquote separate products and separate licenses. And then you spend a decade or more wondering why patients can't access it and physicians won't touch it because it's indistinguishable from so-called adult products and even hemp cannabinoid products too. Medical use is not a product line. It's education, it's clinical guidance, it's access and affordability, it's research, it's public health reporting, and integration into existing conventional healthcare systems and facilities. Ryan's Law passed in California years ago and in Oregon this past session. It says that palliative care and hospice is a condition for which patients can use cannabis. And if they're in a facility, that facility must accommodate them. Right, so integration. If we build medical infrastructure, then the product a consumer buys that a patient also uses under guidance is how every other therapeutic botanical already works. Now, the question that forms in every room is that effect sounds kind of objective. How do you test for it? Well, classification is keyed to 4 measurable attributes: degree and onset of impairment, dose per unit, route of administration, and then conditions of sale and use, which we already assess all 4 of these for other regulated products. We don't have to reinvent anything for cannabis. And the question gets asked 3 times at 3 points with a different question each time. At planting, genotype. Is the plant capable of producing intoxicating cannabinoids at all? Does it have a functional or a non-functional THC synthase gene? At the intermediate level, cannabinoid content of the material moving through the supply chain. We're monitoring that. And then at the finished product, whether it's intoxicating, right? Or at least a potential to intoxicate at the labeled dose or not. And this is the question and its answer that sets the retail channel. Okay. So all of this dissolves the objection I think I hear most from folks, especially farmers, right? Right now we ask our growers to prove a negative in the field and on a schedule with a crop that, it can go from, go hot from heat stress. And then we destroy it if the number comes back wrong. But under this new approach, under this unified framework, classification lands on that intent in the finished product, and nobody proves a negative in the field. We also know that chemotypes, I mentioned the THC synthase, there's others as well, that can do the verification before testing it all, right? And so our framework has an option to verify that once at the seed source and to settle it. This is containment that doesn't need to come from a test, but from the license. So a grower on an industrial tract cannot lawfully move material into cannabinoid use without the license for that use. Okay. So everything I've discussed so far, and it was not exhaustive, is written in black letter in a model bill, an Oregon bill, and a federal bill with the reasoning behind every provision published alongside it. This is Open Materia's open standard tool. And the tool does 3 things. It tells you where your jurisdiction sits today, read against that jurisdiction's code, section by section. It tells where the gap is. It's not a grade, but the specific statutory provisions that create that gap, create those splits. And it gives folks the amendments that close each gap, drafted with reasoning attached. When we talk about the one framework, most people freak out because they know what we have. And how to achieve that can be intimidating. Well, this tool hopes to works to demystify that and dispel that notion. It's really a tool that can hold our hands along the way. And then the reasoning, I said this tool reasons, and this reasoning matters, I think, even more than the bill text, because every decision has a rationale and a rationale in file saying why a call was made, what was rejected in making that call, and what happens if you push on it, right? And so you can interrogate this tool. It's www.openmateria.org, the open standard tool, and it will answer against its corpus rather than on the open internet, okay? See if I can go here real quick, show you guys the open standard tool. Here it is. It's zoomed out a bit. It's not at 100%, just so I could fit it here on the screen. But here's the open standard, those 6 commitments written here at the top. And then here's the tool itself. Oregon. In Oregon, we have real people on the ground representing different stakeholder groups, our public agencies, even legislators who have contributed to what the Oregon draft bill looks like today with an accompanying implementation path. And here's the snapshots I told you, where we stand today, what the gap is, and what the path might look like to achieve the unified framework over time. And this is the tool over here, the ask tool, where you can interrogate the jurisdiction that you're on. And I already asked it a question. I asked which regulatory authority regulates which products under an effect-based system. And the answer, under the Oregon Whole Plant Act, the reconstituted Oregon Cannabis Commission is the purpose-built coordinating body that sets the product safety, testing, labeling, and authentication standards across all herbal cannabis items, intoxicating and non, and the medical use program in conformance with the recognized national standard. Existing agency, right, because Oregon, we're fragmented. We have OLCC, our Liquor Control Commission, that's now the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, their adult use enforcement first. We have the Department of Agriculture over hemp. We have the Oregon Health Authority over medical, and then we have revenue for tax, right? So all existing agencies administer within their competence under that framework. Okay. The commission reviews agency rules and significant actions for framework consistency, and an agency action that conflicts with the framework or harms a segment without coordination does not take effect until conformed. This is a coordinating body with review and hold teeth, not an absorption of existing agencies, and consolidation into a single agency is staged over time at the commission's discretion. Okay. All right. Next slide here. So I used Oregon as an example because it's the forge here. The act is a mandatory in my state. So a legislator or regulator can open the tool and see their own familiar code morphed into what it needs to be and not a foreign document dropped on their desk. It's being built against real agencies and real objections, like I said, from the people who would have to administer it. It's in audit right now by these folks. So folks are looking at it, they're commenting on it, and we're meeting to discuss what things need to move where so that it becomes politically feasible. But strip the Oregon specific parts and the national model is what remains. But on the tool right now exists the model bill, Oregon in real time being the living example, federal and some federal companion pieces to legislation that is moving through Congress. Okay, and the point I want you most to hear here is that this cannot wait for Washington. It says on the slide, it does not wait for Washington, but it can't wait for Washington. It's really time for us smart people to get together and be proactive about rational cannabis policy. If the federal government closes the intoxicating lane for hemp, that displaced demand can move into a licensed effect-based channel that this framework already defines. If it reschedules, the structure absorbs it. If it deschedules, the structure absorbs it. If nothing happens, the structure absorbs that too, right? A state that adopts this stops letting the federal calendar set its tempo. That is not small for anyone who has spent a decade or more writing and rewriting rules every time Congress moves. Okay, so that really rounds out my portion of our webinar today. Dell's coming to the stage next to tackle public domain and one with a deadline. Jessica has what's moving federally and on what clock, and then really looking forward myself too to Twee, who gets to close us out on the process authority model. Let's see, and that's my last slide. So 4 things in order because order does matter. Regulate the plant by what it does. Keep it in the public domain before it can be fenced off. Build medical use as the infrastructure it should have always been. Protect the person instead of prosecuting the molecule and put one authority over the plant. In Oregon here, even our sheriff's department was like, why do we not have one regulatory framework? He lamented. So I'll say plainly what the ask is because it might not be what you expect. Open materia is not asking anyone to endorse anything. It's a working framework, it's a working tool, it's coalition driven, it's designed for folks to interrogate it to help make it better. The current version is just the current version. And what I want from this room is scrutiny. That's what I want from everybody involved in our project to scrutinize this. We will all, with our hats, despite our blind spots, find things in here that can be improved. And the people most likely to find them are the very people who have to enforce it or to regulate it. And right now, in this moment, we no longer have to just accept what is. We have an opportunity to really shape what this becomes. Thank you. And Tweet, I will hand the mic back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Knox. And our next speaker is Dr. Del Potter, founder and chief science officer of BioUnbound. Dr. Potter earned his PhD in 1980 from a joint program between UCSF Medical School and UC Berkeley's Department of Anthropology, specializing in psychiatric anthropology and ethnopsychopharmacology. His early fieldwork took him across the Americas, studying shamanic and indigenous psychotherapeutic practices, from ceremonial psilocybin use in Mazatec in Mexico to ayahuasca traditions among the Shuar in Ecuador. Research that fed into Richard Evans Schulte's landmark work on psychotropic botanicals. A formative mentorship with Dr. Alexander Shulgin steered him towards novel tryptamine chemistry, and he's since built a career spanning both cannabis and psychedelic science. He led science and manufacturing at Leaf Holdings, California's largest automated medical cannabis facility, founded Aya Biosciences to develop cannabinoid-based therapeutics, and directed preclinical and clinical programs at Alvarius Pharmaceuticals, including first-in-human studies of 5-MeO-DMT. He's also done pioneering work using human stem cell-derived brain organoids to study how psychedelics may reverse neuronal changes linked to substance abuse and mental health disorders. Most recently, he founded Spiritus Bioscience, developing next-generation delivery systems for psychedelic compounds, including a sublingual psilocin spray, heading into phase 2B trials in Australia for alcohol use disorder, and now leads BioUnbound, focused on peptide therapeutics at the intersection of psychedelics, longevity, and functional medicine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Del Potter.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to really focus on the pharmaceutical issues associated with the new drug pathways that we're seeing opening up for cannabis. And I want to start at the beginning, I guess. Carl Linnaeus named this plant in 1753 Cannabis sativa. For the 273 years that followed, nobody owned it. And that's what the public domain means. The thing exists, anyone may use it, describe it, breed it, and sell preparations of it, and nobody holds a legal right to stop them. On the 9th of June this year, a German company received permission for the first time to sell a standardized whole plant cannabis extract in Germany and Austria under the trade name Exilbi. That product has an owner. The plant still has none. The distance between those two events is the whole of my presentation. I'm a scientist and I have no real talent for legislative drafting, and I'll leave the model law to the people who do. What I can do is read a patent file and a clinical trial and report what they are doing while the rest of the field argues about drug schedules. My argument is that the most serious near-term threat to whole plant cannabis as a public resource is being built inside the pharmaceutical approval process. And that is moving faster than the scheduling fight. And the tools to answer it are really cheap. They're pretty dull and already sitting in this association's handbook. Next slide. Three federal facts, and I made sure to check all three this morning because two of them could have changed overnight. Start with what the drug schedules actually do because the reporting on this has been wrong almost everywhere. Schedule 1 means the federal government treats a substance as having no accepted medical use. No prescriptions, research permits are hard to get, businesses handling it cannot deduct ordinary expenses on their taxes. Schedule 3 means the substance is a medicine. It can be prescribed, research gets easier, and the tax penalty lifts. On the 28th of April, two narrow categories moved to Schedule 3. Marijuana inside an FDA-approved drug product and marijuana held under a qualifying state medical marijuana license. Bulk plant, extract, adult use product, unlicensed crops, all of that stayed in Schedule 1. DEA acted under a provision of the Controlled Substances Act that lets the agencies move a substance in order to keep the United States in compliance with an international drug treaty. And that provision skips the usual public comment period, which is why nobody outside the agency got to weigh in on it. The 17th of August, 10 days from now, the separate and much larger question, whether all marijuana moves to Schedule 3, went to a hearing before an administrative law judge inside DEA. That hearing ran from the 29th of June to the 15th of July, and the written arguments come due on the 17th. No decision exists yet. No law sets a deadline for the judge for the objection period that follows or for the administrator's final call. This could sit for a year, and I would definitely plan on it sitting for quite some time. The 12th of November, 97 days from now, Congress rewrote the definition of hemp. The old test measured one form of THC in the growing plant and allowed up to 0.3% by dry weight. The new test also counts the acid form that converts into THC when the material is heated, and it puts a ceiling of 0.4 milligram of total THC on a finished package. Industry estimates put roughly 95% of the current hemp cannabinoid market outside the law on that date. And as of yesterday afternoon, a pending spending bill would push most of it to the 11th of December, with synthetic cannabinoids excluded from that delay. But the House didn't act on it last night. Next slide, please. We have one plant, one molecule, three different legal fates. The thing that decides which one applies is a piece of paper about ownership. A state medical license puts your material in Schedule 3. Its chemical twin, grown 2 counties away without that license, stays in Schedule 1. After November, the hemp route that a great many people have been using as a lawful alternative closes under the new measurement, regardless of who grew the crop. Federal law now sorts this plant by who holds title to it. I doubt that that was anyone's original stated intent, but it is what the text does. Next slide, please. The first broad patent claiming whole categories of cannabis chemistry was issued in 2015. Epidiolex, a purified cannabidiol medicine for rare childhood epilepsies, was approved in 2018 at a list price of $32,500 a year. A large trial of a whole plant extract appeared in the journal Nature Medicine last September. A European approval came this June. Everything that fenced this plant happened inside my working life, and most of it inside the last 11 years. And that pace is why I'm worried about the next 2 years. Next slide, please. Ownership has moved to the specification. A specification in drug regulation is the written definition of what a product is, which plant variety, grown where and how, what chemical profile the extract has to show, how much of each compound within what tolerances, which laboratory methods prove all of that. The recipe and the quality standard are together in one document. But nobody can own cannabidiol. Nobody can own the plant. What a company can own is that document. FDA's own consistency requirements compel a sponsor to build it because a plant-based medicine has to be the same product batch after batch, or the trial results mean nothing. The patent system then protects the document for 20 years past the point at which the molecule itself stopped being ownable. That is the enclosure. It is procedural, and almost no one in cannabis policy is watching it. Next slide. 3 layers of ownership now sit over one plant. The molecule, which cannot be owned. The specification is where the fence goes up, and the manufacturing process and the delivery form, which are already in court. Everything the movement has argued about for 30 years lives in the first layer. Everything that will decide access lives in the second and third. Next slide, please. The first layer stands, and it always has. The rule comes from a 2013 Supreme Court decision about patents on breast cancer genes. Isolating something from nature does not make it yours. Finding it, purifying it, and naming it are not inventing it. A cannabinoid pulled out of the plant is a product of nature, and it cannot be patented. But 2 corrections are important. The federal government's own patent on cannabinoids as antioxidants expired in April 2019, and it is still cited as live in policy documents every month. And the broad patent that alarmed the industry in 2015, the one covering whole plant chemotypes, meaning plant types defined by their chemistry rather than their appearance, has never been enforced against anyone in the 11 years since. Patent counsel have read the file, called the claimed chemistry plainly out of date. So where the first layer stops helping is the part most people miss. In 2019, a federal court in Colorado held that a liquid cannabinoid preparation at concentrations that do not occur in nature is patentable after all. The claim covered a liquid in which at least 95% of the total cannabinoids is cannabidiol. Concentrate it, heat it to convert the acid forms into the active ones, put it in a carrier oil at a defined ratio, and the product of nature defense is behind you. Every commercial cannabis medicine on earth sits on that side of the line. Next slide, please. Epidiolex is one purified molecule in an oral solution, and the patents around it come in 2 kinds. The first kind covers using the drug to treat a particular disease. Those run to 2035. The second kind covers the specification itself, the definition of the botanical preparation and its composition and tolerances. Those run to 2041. The specification outlives the medicine by 6 years. The batch consistency work FDA requires of every plant-based sponsor is the same work that produces the longest-lived patent in the file. A company sold $1 billion of that product last year on a molecule nobody is allowed to own. The exclusivity is entirely in the paperwork. Next slide, please. The third layer stopped being theoretical in January. A company called Natural Extraction Systems filed 4 patent lawsuits in a single month against 4 of the largest cannabis operators in the country over patents covering ways of converting cannabinoids from their acid form to their active one. A jury trial is set for May of next year. That plaintiff holds 19 patents, most of them granted in the last 2 years. Before this January, roughly 5 cannabis patent infringement suits had ever been filed in the United States. The suits went in after the December executive order on cannabis and before the April order that made federal enforcement easier for licensed operators. The calendar kind of tells you that it was planned. Next slide, please. Which brings me to the product that proves the point. Vertanicals extract, sold in Europe as Exilby, is a standardized full-spectrum cannabis preparation. 1 proprietary plant variety. 1 facility, 215,000 square feet in Denmark produces it. More than $300 million have been spent developing it over 7 years. It's approved in Germany and Austria in June. In the United States, it holds what FDA calls breakthrough therapy designation, a status that buys the sponsor more agency attention and a much faster review. The pivotal American trial opens on the 1st of September with 810 patients, and the company has said it expects to file for approval in 2028. I'm describing the company accurately. They followed the pathway as it is written, and they met its terms. My only quarrel is what the pathway rewards, because the FDA's consistency requirements make that shape close to mandatory. One variety, one site, one supply chain, one owner. A diverse whole plant market cannot produce a file that satisfies them. Next slide, please. And because I'm a scientist before I'm an advocate, the trial deserves a real close reading rather than just paying attention to the press release. 820 patients with chronic low back pain. Patients rated their pain on a scale of 0 to 10. The extract beat the placebo by 6/10 of 1 point. 6/10 of a point on a 10-point scale. Researchers have a name for the smallest change a patient can actually feel, and most published estimates for back pain put that at a full point or more. This result sits below it. 17% of patients stopped taking the drug because of side effects, against 3.5% on a placebo. Then there was a second phase, in which patients who had responded well were quietly reassigned, half of them back to placebo to see who relapsed. The relapse rates came out close enough that the difference could easily be chance. That phase did not succeed, and it is the phase that tests whether an effect is real and lasting. The honest strength of the program is a different number. 54% of patients on the drug got at least a 30% reduction in pain, against 39.5% on a placebo. That is a super incredible finding for real people who are suffering. Of course, it's a long way from what Exilby's marketing will eventually say. Will eventually say. One more caution. The comparison against opioids that you will see quoted comes from a different and smaller study in which everyone knew who was getting what. Its main purpose was to measure constipation, where the extract did well. On pain, the difference against opioids was 1/3 of a point. Next slide, please. One sentence in that regulatory record defines the enclosure better than anything I could write. And this is the quote: "The findings cannot be extrapolated to other cannabis extracts or to prescribed cannabis flower. The evidence attaches to the product, and it stops at the product line. 50 years of clinical observation on the plant itself becomes, in regulatory terms, unproven. The commons is left holding an organism that now has a licensed pharmaceutical competitor and no file of its own." Next slide. Two pieces of vocabulary. An investigational new drug application is permission to begin testing a substance in people. A new drug application is the filing that asks FDA to approve it for sale. FDA has approved 3 plant-based new drug applications in 20 years. Green tea catechins in 2006. Croton tree latex in 2012. Birch bark triterpenes in 2023. Against those 3, more than 800 cannabis investigational applications have been filed since the 70s. FDA's guidance for a plant medicine with many active compounds asks a sponsor to specify where and how the plant is grown, to prove the plant's identity by its physical form, and where the botany is disputed by its DNA, to show a chemical fingerprint sensitive enough to catch any change in the raw material and to account for every unidentified peak in the analysis, and to run the pivotal trial across several production batches with patients randomly assigned to each batch. After approval, changing the farm or the growing practice reopens the entire question. Every one of those requirements is scientifically defensible. I would defend most of them myself. Together, they describe a company rather than a commons, and that's the entire problem. Next slide. Which is where a laboratory can do something, because the patents built on top of this are weaker than they look. A patent has to clear 3 separate tests, and it helps to know which is which. The first asks whether the thing isn't even eligible for a patent at all. That is the product of nature question. And I've already said it is thin ground for us. The second asks whether the invention would have been obvious to someone already working in the field. This is our strongest lever. A claim to a particular chemical profile collapses if plants with that profile were already being grown and the record shows it. In the one serious challenge of this kind against the cannabinoid patent in 2019, the 2 broadest claims of a cannabis epilepsy patent were canceled as obvious, partly on the strength of the patent holder's own earlier publication. The narrower claims survived only because the challenger did the work badly and put on no expert witness. The third asks whether the applicant actually describes what they claim to have invented in enough detail to show that they really had it. Across a sample of 740 cannabis applications, this is exactly where cannabis filings underperform their pharmaceutical counterparts. They claim a broad category of plants and describe only a handful of examples. And chemical profiles shift with growing conditions, which the applicants concede in their own documents. One plant patent states outright that the variety's chemistry varies with how it is cultivated. A patent whose defining feature moves with the weather is hard to defend and really even harder to enforce. Next slide. Now, the reason that obviousness argument has been so hard to support. Prior art is the term for anything already public that shows an invention was already known. A published paper, a catalog, a dated technical description. If an examiner can find it, the examiner can refuse the patent. If nobody wrote it down, it does not exist as far as the patent office is concerned. Breeders worked in secret for 40 years because publishing was evidence against them. No printed record means no prior art. An examiner searching the file finds an empty shelf where 4 decades of work should sit and issues the patent. Roughly 8,700 United States cannabis patents were examined against that empty shelf. And the asymmetry is simple. The plants existed, the growers had the chemical profiles, the terpene combinations, and the unusual cannabinoid ratios decades ago. The written proof was never safe to create, and the remedy is really cheap. A plant variety characterized and published with a date is prior art forever, and it costs a sequencing run in a very short paper. Next slide, please. The Commons already tried this once and lost it. The Open Cannabis Project collected strain data from farmers in order to publish it as prior art. Its genetic sequencing ran through a commercial company. In the spring of 2019, that company announced its own breeding program built on the same farmer-submitted data. The farmers had been told the data would not be used for breeding. The project dissolved on the 6th of May, 2019, and in the 7 years since, nobody has picked that work back up. So the lesson there, I believe, is about custody. An archive of this kind cannot be funded and fed by a party that is able to patent what it collects. Any serious version needs a keeper with no patenting interest of its own, and that design requirement is the part people skip. Next slide, please. The instrument itself is old, and it works in 5 steps. You publish a dated public description, detailed enough that a competent person in the field could reproduce it. A plant variety, a chemical profile, an extraction method, a dosage specification. It enters the searchable record, indexed and time-stamped, where an examiner actually looks. Anything filed later that claims the same thing is refused outright because it is no longer new. Claims close to it become much harder to obtain because the examiner can now argue they were obvious. What survives is too narrow to fence off a whole category. And it never expires. No renewal, no maintenance fee, no other party, no lawsuit to bring. It cannot be sold, revoked, or lost in a bankruptcy. Part of the second step already exists. Cannapedia records a cryptographic fingerprint of each genetic sequence on a public ledger, so the date stamp on roughly 2,000 plant varieties will outlive the company that created it. And that is exactly the right instinct, and it should be the norm for every characterization that a public laboratory generates. Next slide, please. There is a precedent for doing this. In 2020, the Usona Institute published a 4-step method for making psilocybin at kilogram scale, deliberately, so that nobody could patent the root. One batch yields 40 to 50,000 clinical doses. Preventing that enclosure cost the price of a journal article. The drug program around it cost about $90 million over 5 years. And Usona did not win the race. Usona's mid-stage trial showed a much larger effect on depression than its for-profit competitor's late-stage trial did. The competitor holds patents and began filing for approval in May and will very likely reach the market first. Open publication protects the method. Commercial speed still decides who gets the label. Both are worth planning for, and they should be kept straight and separate. Next slide, please. 6 things can be done in the next 12 to 18 months with no new law, and all 6 are available in the ordinary work of people on this call. Publish characterized plant varieties. Laboratories and state programs already generate this data and then throw away its legal value. Published with a date, it blocks later patents on chemical profiles and cannabinoid ratios. The extra cost is close to nothing because the sequencing and the assays are already being paid for. Stand up an archive with a neutral keeper held by a university or a body affiliated with this association for under $250,000 a year. Neutral custody is the whole design, and that's the thing that failed in 2019. Harmonize the methods for characterizing whole plant material through this committee so that a published result from one state laboratory can be cited against a patent application filed anywhere. Adopt the open standard diagnostic. It costs staff time and it produces a comparable public record of where each state actually sits. File written comments in the DEA proceeding before the record closes and put public domain language somewhere a reviewing court can later find it. And apply the process authority model to cannabinoid products, which is the argument I really most want to leave you with. Next slide. Over 3 to 10 years, 4 things. A public specification for whole plant cannabis, a defined extract standard with cannabinoid and terpene content stated as numbers, limits on contaminants, an agreed method for judging whether a new batch matches. Publish it as it is built, rather than filed at the end and kept. A nonprofit sponsored approval application on a single condition. And I recommend chronic low back pain. There's a filing route known by its section number as 505B2. That lets a sponsor rely on published studies it did not run instead of repeating them. My own modeling puts the philanthropic cash requirement between $30 and $40 million, with federal grants and manufacturer co-investment carrying the bulk of it. Those numbers only work because the evidence is published. Relying on a published trial takes roughly 2 years and a large share of the clinical spending off a public program. Whatever the reasons that trial went into Nature Medicine, the effect on our timeline is immediate, and it's ours to use. A seed and plant trust holding varieties with a keeper that cannot patent them on the model of the open source seed initiative. The weakness before an attorney in the audience finds it is That initiative gave up on a legally enforceable license in 2014 because you cannot realistically attach a contract to a seed packet, and its pledge has never been tested in court. Treat it as a norm and pair it with publication, which needs no enforcement at all. And licensing agreements taken off the shelf. The Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative publishes model contracts, non-exclusive, permanent, royalty-free, worldwide, with the manufacturing know-how handed over and prices set at cost plus margin. Nobody has to draft this from nothing. Next slide, please. Which is where my work meets Rachel's. An effect-based standard stops the classification of a product from depending on where it came from. Hemp or marijuana, plant-derived or synthetic, all of it gives way to the dose in each unit, how strongly and how quickly it impairs, how it is taken, and how it is sold. Rules written around origin lose their grip, and that is a real structural gain. The fourth principle of the open standard already asks for a public record that keeps the plant and its preparations from being patented out of reach. That principle needs an instrument, and publication is the instrument. An effect-based standard tells a regulator how to classify a product by what it does. A public specification tells that same regulator that at least one qualifying product is the one the public owns. Score a state on the first and you get a map, and the second and the map has somewhere to lead. Next slide, please. The strongest objection to our framework will come from the commercial pharmaceutical side. A pharmaceutical entrant will say this: if products are classified by their effect at a labeled dose, then only products with a proven effect profile can be classified at all. Ours has one. Flowers does not. Permit what has been characterized and restrict the rest until it is. That sounds like a coherent argument, and it turns an effect-based standard into a wall of enclosure. But I have three answers. Write the framework so that an effect profile can be established by published repeatable characterization done by any competent laboratory rather than only by a company's private file. Keep personal use, home cultivation, and sharing outside the product classification entirely, which the fifth principle already does, so that a scheme for regulating commerce never becomes a licensing scheme for the plant. And build a public file while there is still time, because the strongest protection against the wall is a second qualifying product that nobody owns. Next slide, please. Three asks, all of them inside what this association already does. Extend the Food Processing Authority's directory to cover cannabinoid effect validation. For nearly 50 years, AFDO has maintained the national list of experts who validate that a food process is safe before the product reaches the public, and it has done that with no federal licensing scheme attached to it. The pattern ports directly. In canned food, you control for bacterial growth using acidity, temperature, and time. In cannabinoid product, you would control for impairment using milligrams per unit, onset time, and route of administration. An independent expert validates the process, the manufacturer remains responsible, and no new bureaucracy is required. Thwee will take this probably further than I could. Add a public domain criterion to the model code for consumable hemp products into the open scoring standard. A state should be scored on whether its rules leave a public preparation lawful to make. And host the prior art archive, or tell us who should. State laboratories generate characterization data every working day and throw away its legal value. This association is the one body positioned to hold that record without an interest in patenting it. Next slide, please. The science is settled enough. The ownership is not. Every instrument this needs already exists. Sequencing is cheap. Publication is free. The approval pathway is open and its requirements are written down. The model licensing contracts are drafted and sitting on a website in Geneva. And the record-keeping model is one this association has run for 47 years. What's missing is a decision to use them before 2028, when the first whole plant application closes and the reference standard for cannabis medicine becomes somebody else's asset. After that, we will still have the plant, but we'll be asking permission to describe it. I'll hand it back to Twee.
Thanks, Del. Great presentation and a lot for us to digest. Okay, our next speaker is Jessica Montagna, founder of Drug Policy Watch and Hold in Common. For more than 2 decades, Jessica has worked at the intersection of advocacy, community engagement, and strategic policy reform. Work that began in the early 2000s after her son's autism diagnosis led her to help pass insurance mandates for autism spectrum therapies and expand services in her local school district. That advocacy grew into major policy wins. In 2014, she helped build a Missouri patient advocacy platform that contributed to autism becoming a qualifying condition for medical cannabis in multiple states. And in 2016, she secured public support from a sitting sheriff for pediatric medical cannabis access, a national first. Today, through Drug Policy Watch, Jessica maintains an independent source tracker of cannabis, hemp, and psychedelic policy across all 50 states and the federal landscape, turning that intelligence into exposure maps, briefs, and strategy for operators and advocates navigating a fast-moving and often contradictory regulatory environment. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thanks for having me. So today, I'm going to go off camera just so that I avoid an internet lag through this. Thanks, Dr. Potter, first of all, and thank you, Dr. Knox, for the framework. Dr. Potter gave you the reason to keep it public. I'm going to tell you where policy stands now and the community costs if we get it wrong. I am Jessica Montagna. I run Drug Policy Watch. It is an independent tracker of cannabis, hemp, and psychedelic policy in DC and all 50 states. I want to start by telling you how I ended up here today, because it is not due to a professional credential. I am not here as an attorney or a lobbyist. I am not an operator, and I do not have a product whose legal status is determined by the policy and regulations that are passed. I do this as a mother. The policies and regulations that are decided will leave their marks for generations to come. That is the reason I stay up at night reading the bills, the statutes, the budgets, and it is the reason I will not put the topic down. I cannot read a provision that burdens or creates risks to communities and see it as a market question. I have never once been able to do that, and I never will be able to do that because our children are not a commodity. Everyone on this webinar is someone's child, and most of you are someone's parent. And that is the only qualification I am claiming here today. Next slide, please. When we argue about drug policy in public, we argue about markets. Who gets a license? What is the cap? Which category a product falls into? The conversations focus on who gets to control the profits. The burden of getting it wrong lands on more than the market. It lands on communities and families, and it lands unevenly. It lands on patients and caregivers whose access and legal status changed because the definition changed, not because their needs or behaviors changed. Veterans and older adults are usually the first to lose something that they have come to rely on with access tightening. It also lands on young people who will carry criminal risk for the natural plant material in a joint, while corporations are allowed to sell the manufactured kind in a vape. But I will come back to that later. It also lands on farmers and small operators who modeled businesses around a legal framework that is now at risk of becoming felons overnight. And it lands on rural communities where local jobs and access would vanish. And the last group on the slide is you. You are being asked to enforce 3 sets of rules that do not agree with each other, and you wrote none of them. That is a real burden on you too. And many of you are the face that the community sees. So you get all the blame for something that is not your fault. So drug policy is a community health issue that belongs to all of us. It reaches every family in this country, including mine and yours. And that fact holds true regardless of the status of a substance as a commodity. Before I give you any dates or data, I want to correct the way we are addressing the subject. We talk about drug policy like it has a finish line. One bill, one vote, one ruling, one deadline, and then it is settled and we all go back to our regular lives. It has never once worked that way, and it is never going to work that way. Drug policy changes daily. It changes through lines in budgets and agency guidance and licensing rules and in local code. It changes on Tuesdays when nobody is watching. It will be changing when everyone on this webinar has retired and when the people who replace us have retired too. That means future generations bear the cost of what comes from our decisions today. All of this happens to them while they are too young to understand or have a say in any of it. Or it lands on the communities that did not have the resources or platform to get up and be heard about what was best for them. So the real question is not what passes this year. It is whether the people carrying the risk have any say or get to be considered in the decisions at all. Next slide, please. This is where drug policy stands today. Medical cannabis has been moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. The DEA administrative hearing ran from June 29th to July 15th. Post-hearing briefs are due August 17th, and the DEA administrator decides what happens from there. Nothing has changed yet, and either way, it does not touch what your state's statutes say. The legal definition of hemp changes on November 12th, and with it, a large portion of the hemp market will disappear. That change was signed last year with a 1-year delay, which is why we are seeing an onslaught of hemp bills being filed and lobbied for right now. In Congress, 3 bills answering the same question 3 different ways. HR 9830 repeals and replaces the hemp ban. CAOA deschedules. HR 7567 already passed the House carrying a hemp title, Section 10005. All 3 live, none passed. If you want to watch 1 bill instead of 5, HR 7024 has 38 co-sponsors, more than any other hemp bill currently in Congress. Co-sponsors are not vote counts, but they are a signal that the votes are there. 3 moves, 3 directions, no resolution in sight. That's not just a Washington problem, it's an all of us problem. It is a stack of conflicting instructions landing on your desks, in stores and clinics, and in traffic stops. Next slide, please. What changes on November 12th? Of those 3, November 12th is the one that lands on communities the hardest and not on Washington. 3 things will change. Hemp becomes 0.3% total THC by dry weight, not D9 alone. THC and Delta 8 are now included in that total, and the finished container is capped at 0.4 milligrams of total THC. There is an industry estimate that roughly 95% of hemp products on shelves right now fall outside of that line. So you can see the size of what is coming if nothing changes. Now think about who is currently holding that product. A rural shop owner who's stocked what the law has permitted since 2018. A farmer who currently has plants in the ground. A patient who finally found something that helps with the pain that used to keep them up all night. None of them did anything wrong. All of them will pay for it. I want to make a couple of corrections to common misconceptions I have been seeing frequently online and in the media. First, Schedule 3 is reclassification. One slide for yes. It is not legalization. It clears no criminal records. It releases no one from prison. It does not make one new thing legal in a state that did not already have it legal. The only real change is the tax treatment under 280E, and even that has a catch. HR 1447 is a 21-word bill that will keep denying deductions no matter where the plant ends up scheduled, unless you hold FDA approval. That misunderstanding has a cost, and it is not just academic. Every time it gets reported as legalization, somebody hears that and thinks that their risk has ended. Somebody's grandmother ends up assuming it is legal to carry pain patches and gummies across a state line and accidentally commits a felony. Someone else assumes an old conviction clears itself. None of that is true. These misconceptions have real consequences for the people who believe them. Second, HR 9830 is not an end to the hemp ban. It repeals and replaces the ban with federal framework that regulates hemp the way we regulate alcohol. 21 and older, a 3-tier tax, FDA limits on intoxicating D9 potency per serving within 1 year. Here's what this looks like in practice. The bill caps a vape at 50 milligrams of Delta 9 per serving, with no listed cap on servings for the vape itself. An edible is held to 5 milligrams per serving, again with no cap on servings per container. Meanwhile, the plant gets squeezed from the other side because the bill measures it by total THC, including THCA. So the converted D9 hemp vape becomes legal and the natural plant in a joint does not. Both contain intoxicating THC, and 50 milligrams is close to what a single joint would have for comparison. The real bright spot in this bill is fiber and grain. It defines industrial hemp broadly: stock and fiber, whole grain, oil, microgreens, and edible leaf. And it writes industrial hemp and hemp seed foods into the federal food definition at 21 USC 321S. That puts our fiber and grain farmers on an ordinary food footing and actually gives them a shot. Living to witness that market come to life has been a personal dream of mine for as long as I can remember. Alongside it, CAOA was refiled July 16th, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunities Act. It would end the federal ban on cannabis and treat it more like alcohol with licenses, taxes, and safety rules. Federal convictions going back to 1971 automatically expunged, federal cannabis prisoners released, and no one deported over cannabis use. Anything intoxicating moves into the licensed cannabis system, leaving hemp as the plain lane of fiber, grain, and CBD. And it only punishes the seller who sells to someone under 21. It never makes the young person a felon for a joint or a gummy. Next slide, please. Who pays when we get it wrong? With all of the conversations focused on markets, thresholds, and licenses, it is easy to miss new penalty provisions. So I like to focus on them. In several states, the young person is now becoming the criminal offender for simple personal use, not the retailer, not the distributor, the 20-year-old. In West Virginia, trade and possession for someone under 21 is a misdemeanor with up to a year in prison, and then a felony on a second offense with 1 to 3 years in a state correctional facility. In force since June 12th of this year. Yes, this is new. It moved through as part of an agricultural bill. Underage beer possession in that same state tops out at 72 hours in jail. In Texas, a 20-year-old with a D8 gummy is looking at a state felony. The same 20-year-old with the beer is looking at a fine of up to $500 and no jail on a first offense. In Alabama, the gummy is a felony. The beer is a fine of $25 to $100. Federally, HR 9830 reaches the young person directly at Section 301 KKK2. Up to a year for a first offense and up to 3 years on a second offense. And please remember, an offense is defined to include personal consumption. Can you imagine if someone wrote a law to put a 20-year-old in prison for 3 years for a beer? The reason that no one saw these changes happening is because they never come in a headline or bill title. Penalty changes often write in budgets, bills, licensing, and public law. And one tracker we audited, out of nearly 1,400 bills, only 280 had cannabis or hemp word in the title at all. A single line added to a budget resolution is easy for anyone to miss. Next slide, please. Who lives with our decisions? A framework that cannot be made rational, to borrow Dr. Knox's phrase, does not just frustrate a regulator. It hands a felony record to a 20-year-old for something that was legal at a gas station the week before. And here's what I just cannot get past. The record follows that 20-year-old for the rest of their life. Housing, school, employment, custody, all complicated because of poorly made rules that they did not have a say in. And it does not end with them, because a family absorbs a felony the way a family absorbs an illness. Everybody in that house carries it. This is not a market problem, it is a community problem. Somebody younger inherits the consequences of the decisions we make today. They inherit the statutes, written well or written poorly. They inherit the penalties and every record those penalties create. They inherit whether the medicine belongs to everyone or to someone. And that is the part that keeps me up. We are writing rules for people who are not in the room and cannot be, our kids and their kids. And that is how Drug Policy Watch was born. I believe this information should be available to everyone because it impacts everyone. Next slide, please. Drug Policy Watch is my website that covers drug policy through all 50 states and DC, with every claim linked to a primary source. What we have here is a picture of the state map. I built this because I wanted it for myself and for the other moms and families I know who follow drug policy the way that I do. We keep needing to know what is happening in each state, and we needed one place to track it. So you start at the map on the homepage, and then you go to your states, and you'll be able to click on it and see what your state actually allows. If you click to the next slide, then that will show you, when you click on your state, you'll pull up the snapshot. You'll be able to go through all of the topics, click on for the full brief, see the bills, click right through to read the actual bill for yourself in real text. The one that we picked today to show is California. It covers home grow, medical use, adult use, hemp THC, psychedelics, decriminalization, and harm reduction, all in one, with one view of what is moving right now. There is more than just this on the sitemap. There's a beginner's guide to drug policy. And then, yes, slide 8. And how to be heard. We walk you through how to advocate for yourself and your family. Slide 9, please. Sorry. So here's what you can do on Monday. Before you write a memo about what another state did or what another bill says, pull that state or that bill and read the primary record. Check your own bill trackers if you have one, and make sure that you are looking outside of just the title lines to check for penalty layers. And if you find something on the site that is wrong, tell me. I will correct it in public with a dated note. That is the deal, and it never expires. I want to end where I started. I am not here as an expert. I am here as a mother who got tired of not being able to find the answers to questions that impact all of us. Our kids do not get a vote on any of this, but they will inherit what comes from every one of these decisions stacked up. The definitions and statutes we create today impact their entire lives. It is critical that we get this right. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Twee.
Thanks, Jessica. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try and do this by introducing myself, and then I will go ahead and share my screen. So for those of you who don't know me, I am the founder and CEO of Twee Food Consulting, where I provide expert compliance training, auditing, gap analysis, and scientific technical assistance across a wide range of regulated sectors, including human food, dietary supplements, cosmetics, animal feed, cannabis, hemp, psilocybin, kava, kratom, and other natural psychedelics. My work has spanned into food safety, CGMP, HACCP, QMS, food safety management plans, environmental management plans, laboratory standards, organic and kosher certification, occupational health, and fire and life safety. Between 2010 and 2015, I served as the lead foodborne illness and outbreak investigator for Denver, and was also the very first cannabis investigator in the nation. And that was for Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. I established groundbreaking regulatory precedent by applying food safety protocols to marijuana processing, issuing the first 5 cannabis product recalls, and leading the first foodborne illness investigation of a marijuana operation. I collaborated with the Denver Fire Marijuana Fire Prevention Team and was instrumental in identifying various health hazards associated with pesticide-contaminated cannabis, specifically myclobutanol, or some people know that as Eagle 20, and abamectin, which resulted in the mass embargo and destruction of hundreds of thousands of pounds of adulterated cannabis plants and products in 2015. I also helped identify process-specific hazards for cannabis extraction facilities, which helped Denver Fire Department set the standards for cannabis fire safety codes nationwide, which resulted in the 2018 Denver Fire Code and 2018 International Fire Code, Chapter 39, Processing and Extraction Facilities, formerly known as marijuana operations. I later served as the executive committee, on the executive committee for Colorado's CHAMP initiative, which helped drafted the state's first USDA-approved hemp management plan. And today I serve as one of the co-chairs for the for AFDO's Cannabis, Hemp, and Natural Psychedelics Committee. I'm the vice president of Western Association of Food and Drug Officials and chair of Rocky Mountain Food Safety. And I continue to advise regulatory agencies, legislators, and industry stakeholders nationwide, helping bridge science, compliance, and policy in emerging markets. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so you can see my presentation. Just give me a quick moment. Sorry. Okay, so today I am going to talk about the process authority that I have helped form. And for those of you who are not in the food safety realm, you may be questioning, what is a process authority? So the traditional definition of a process authority is a person or organization with expert knowledge of thermal processing for low acidified or canned foods. And the extension of the process authority, what I'm proposing is bringing together a multidisciplinary firm with experts in cultivation, extraction, isolation, processing, refinement, conversion, manufacturing, packaging, labeling, and testing of cannabis, hemp, and psychedelic products. Now, why is this necessary? We all know that there are various federal statuses for all the different commodities that we're talking about. Cannabis remains federally scheduled. Hemp has a federal definition of the currently 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis, and psychedelics such as ibogaine and psilocybin remain federally controlled but a number of states have authorized regulated access. Currently, there's no process filing pathway for these types of products because of their federal status. And so states are actually left to fill in the gap. They have to have the experts in their own organization in order to determine whether a process is safe or not, which they may or may not have. And so what we're proposing is I have brought together a firm of experts in cultivation, extraction, isolation, processing, refinement, conversion, yes, conversion, manufacturing, packaging, labeling, and testing. And so the various products that we can serve are all different types of cannabis and hemp products, from the flower and pre-rolls all the way down to the isolates, distillates, and minor cannabinoids and everything in between. And then for the psychedelics, all the various different types of natural psychedelics that are in either legal currently or in the process of becoming legal in various states. So how do we build a process file? What we do is we will do a facility and equipment review, and that is with experts that understand not only the engineering of types of equipment, but also ensuring that they're meeting the fire code, meeting the building code. And then if we need to bring in other experts for such as an industrial hygienist or someone to ensure that everything is meeting that specifics state or municipalities fire and building code requirements, we will bring somebody in to conduct the audit. There will also be an audit for the formulation, for all the inputs, all the product specifications, as well as the process. The process validation will be a part of not only the extraction, but also any sort of post-extraction processing, any refinement, if there are any types of conversions, and then that includes any sort of manufacturing for finished products, which could very well be something as simple as a tincture or a gummy, all the way to, sublingual tablets. So we would verify the safety of the process that they are providing, helping identify not only the critical control points, but also any control points. So very similar to a HACCP plan, very similar to a food safety plan. And that process will then not only be established, but also documented and put on file, not filed with the FDA, because currently there's no process pathway for that. However, what we can do is hold on to that information, protecting the IP and protecting the formulation for the operator, but also offering adherence to compliance, as well as acting as a regulatory liaison for the operator. So as I had already mentioned, because of the various classifications and scheduling of these products, there is no current pathway. For the low acid canned foods and acidified foods, normally the process would then be filed with the FDA. FDA can review your process, your scheduled process, and ask any questions of the process to the operator and or the process authority. Where these commodities were not able to file with the FDA currently, what we're proposing is we would be filing all of that information, not only protecting it for the client, but also being able to field any sort of regulatory inquiries to ensure that the operator is operating in such a way to ensure the safety of the product. Because again, as a former regulator and having to learn everything about the industry from, the cultivation all the way to the finished products, you may not always have the experts on staff to consult with to, identify whether or not this solvent that they're using is safe, or the processing or the post-processing of this product. Were they able to remove all of the solvents or anything that might be detrimental? And how is the testing being conducted to ensure that the product not only meets specification, but also is safe? And also, I will say that the review of the operator's specialized process with their formulation. That's a safety assessment. That is not an approval. That does not mean that the FDA has approved it. That does not constitute or imply an approval by any state or federal regulatory agency. This is simply a review of the process of the formulation of the equipment within that facility. As long as there are no changes that the operator has made, even to the equipment, or changes to inputs. Every single time there is a change, a new review needs to be conducted for that specific process. And so that is something that would be held in confidence for the operator, but also to act as a liaison with the regulatory agencies to help address any sort of concerns, and then providing any sort of additional information that the regulator needs on behalf of the operator. So I've already mentioned this. Any formulation and process specifications and data will be treated as trade secrets. They will be safeguarded and reviewed by the consulting firm, and we will only share information to the agencies and the people that require them so that they can perform their specific duties. However, the client themselves will retain the ownership of everything from their formulation to systems to data, and we will be the point of contact for regulator questions. So the various areas of expertise will be cultivation and agricultural science, and that is all the way from propagation all the way to harvest and post-harvest processing. We also have experts for extraction, isolation, and the chemistry, which includes, solvent and solvent-less extraction, any sort of purification, isolation, conversion chemistry, and manufacturing of the various products. And then, of course, ensuring that all processes meet good manufacturing practices, from manufacturing all the way to packaging, labeling, as well as testing of the products. And then serving as a regulatory liaison for the operator. Additional services that can also be provided, because we want to ensure that the product is meeting the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, ensuring that it's not misbranded. There will be a review of websites, of social medias, handles, and any sort of promotional materials, because we all understand as regulators that this is an extension of the product's label. So you can't list everything legally and compliantly on the label and then have misbranding on your website or your brochures or your social media or any sort of advertisements. So we would ensure that there would be a review of all of these marketing and labeling of products for compliance. So how does this generally work? It would start with a consultation to understand the scope of work, and then reviewing documents. And then if the process isn't already established, assisting with the validation of the process, and then filing the process so that we can refer back to it as needed, and then providing ongoing support with regulators. So this is a firm that I have brought together experts that I have worked with since 2010. I'm an OG. I've been in the space for a very long time, and these are all people who are either former regulators or experts in their specific spaces. And what this is to assist not only the different municipalities and states that have to go in and conduct inspections of these operations, but also to assist with the operator to ensure compliance with the current regulatory requirements, either in the state or federally. So that is all I have to kind of introduce the process authority. And what I'll have us do is come back on all the panelists, all the speakers. We don't have any questions from any of the participants. But what I would like to do is I would like to ask questions of the panelists based off of their presentation. So if we can get everybody back on screen. Dr. Knox.
She might have internet issues.
Oh, okay. Okay. She has a new baby and she's feeding her baby. So we will ask her the specific questions later, because I know that, we always have a concern regarding any sort of regulations or even legislations that are being proposed. And so at this point in time, Dell, thank you so much for your extremely comprehensive explanation of not only patents, but what's going on, what we need to do. What do you think, and you've already addressed it in your presentation regarding pharmaceutical companies and the patents that they have. What do you think, how do you think that they can control um, not only not only the legalization, but also the scheduling, if they can, because they do have money, right? It's pay to play, I feel, with the outcome of not only this DEA rescheduling, but also, just the future of cannabis, because at this point in time, the future kind of looks bleak.
Well, I think what's taking place is that scheduling aligns well with the goals of the pharma industry. Uh, by moving medical products and pharmaceutical products and, from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, that opens up research. It makes things much easier to get approval. It makes it easier to develop funding from institutional capital as well. So it certainly works in their favor. What my concern is that, they'll now see this as a green light, and we're already seeing this in the number of patents that are being submitted, the number of new drug applications that are coming out. They'll see this as an opportunity. We know, from what I was saying that, you can't patent the plant, but what you can patent are the pharmaceutical preparations, the extracts, what they would describe as medicines. And what I think is most concerning about what's taking place with the example of Vertanical, the German company, is that they have, started with a cultivar and they've taken it all the way to a finished medicine. And what that's done is, made it very difficult. It's a strategy to make it very difficult to duplicate that. And what it does is it captures just about every part of the supply chain. And in that process, uh, disenfranchises much of what people have been using for years. And now what we'll see is that if we want to refer to a cannabis medicine, I mean, what's really happening is the legality and commercial interest is really intersecting. Uh, so, you know, it becomes more and more difficult as time goes on for us to be able to retain what we've spent the last 40, 50 years creating in terms of access to cannabis medicines. Uh, you know, we were in a situation previously where, uh, you know, Big Pharma said, let's go ahead and try and capture one molecule. And the argument has always been that a whole plant extract is more favorable to a lot of these conditions. And now Big Pharma is recognizing that in the move to Schedule 3. And they're saying, well, okay, we're going to capture whole plant medicines as well. But there's an opportunity for the opportunities I described to keep as much as possible in the public domain. And it's not really a small undertaking. Parts of it are, parts of it involve just publication and creating prior art. The actual public domain cannabis medicine project that I've been describing, it costs money, but we can do it far less expensively than conventional new drug applications that a commercial entity would bring before the FDA. So I'm hoping that we can get a groundswell of public recognition and motivation to keep the plant in the public domain, because the window will be closing.
And everything that you proposed for AFTO to do their part, I'm gonna have to talk to I'm gonna have to talk to Steve and Steve about that and see, what we can do to assist in that. And we can talk more about that offline, but I think that's a great idea because, where AFTO is really here to help educate and to help, provide knowledge from experts. And, it would be a little bit different than what we currently do, but I think, it's always worth a conversation. So Jessica, because we all know that you read every single bill.
Not
That
everyone.
is
I do my
just about
best.
every single bill. So what can you tell us? Because there's been so many bills that have been proposed, really trying to, before the November 12th cliff, right? That deadline, because that really impacts the hemp industry. We're seeing it everywhere at this point, not only for the November 12th deadline, but also some of the enforcement action that has happened in Texas. And so what can you elaborate on to help educate the participants, or sorry, the attendees,
I mean,
on
I would
what
be
is coming?
Yeah, I'd be a lot happier with any of the hemp bills if they weren't creating new criminal charges for, especially for young people. But creating new felonies for consumption is, I think, a pretty big issue. And if you compare that to, the penalties for a beer for someone of the same age, it's way out of proportion. So those are my biggest concerns. I think that there's others, but that one's a really good place to start. I'm hoping that Dr. Knox's framework proposal can give everybody on both sides something to consider, and we can all have a conversation about how to try to make this work for everybody.
Agreed. And Dr. Knox, I know that we had discussed this previously, very specifically about how and who is going to define what is considered an intoxicant, at what thresholds, because you have a very different perspective as a clinician. And when legislators or regulators are trying to create regulations, they're trying to understand at what level should we regulate, at what level should we, enforce. And so what is it that you're proposing for everyone to address and also look at, and maybe even have the conversations before these regulations, if we're able to bring everybody to one table? What is it that you're proposing that we do to move forward to help legislators and regulators create fair, science-based regulations?
So our framework in the Whole Plant Act, it deliberately does not put a number in statute. The statute defines the classification concept, right? Intoxicating potential at the labeled dose, with emphasis on potential, and I'll get back to that in a second. And this can be determined by genetic markers like that functional status of the THCA synthase gene, by cannabinoid content. The operative threshold and the test methods are set by rule, but in Oregon's instance, it'd be by the coordinating authority in conformance with what needs to become a recognized national standard. And there's two reasons for that. A number in statute today in any state or a federal, bill can't move without reopening that act and being relitigated, which means it will be wrong for years, like it is now everywhere. So years at a time, and everyone will know it's wrong, and we won't be able to do anything about it. And then there's no scientific consensus yet on what number that should be. I know there are multiple groups working on it out there, which is why I was like, we don't need to work on that. There are groups, national work groups trying to figure this out. So what we won't do is let 50 jurisdictions invent their own ratios, their own thresholds on a whim, none of which will ever conform to each other. That's what I was mentioning when I was speaking to the interoperability between states now. It doesn't exist. So our bills point to this national standard so that when it exists, that's what states and the federal government adopt. The liability, the intoxicating potential, and this, we really need to understand this. Why does no roadside test exist for impairment due to cannabis? Why can't we figure that out? Why are people in such arms about how pre-employment screening occurs with, a bad, THC result? There just will never exist a way to assign a dose to impairment like we can alcohol. It will never exist. A product, let's just take one product, a product that might intoxicate one person will not intoxicate another person. And it has very little to do with that product. Sure, it's chemical composition, whether or not it has cannabinoids that are liable to intoxicate or impair, and much more to do with human physiology. We all have endocannabinoid systems, endocannabinoid domes, right? This is the master regulatory network in our body that's keeping all of our systems, all of our organs, our neurotransmitter systems in balance. It's doing a whole lot of work. And we have this thing called tone that describes how the receptors of this system, the innate chemical signaling chemicals of this system exist in our bodies. Some of us are deficient in some of them. Some of us are overexpressing certain receptors, underexpressing others. And so when we consume that same cannabinoid product, that physiology inside of our own bodies, how quickly you metabolize cannabinoids and more, is what also determines whether a product will be intoxicating to me versus intoxicating to another. Again, let me reiterate this using that roadside example. This is why someone pulled over for whatever reason and gets tested positive, tested hot, might actually pass an impairment test. While someone who took very, very, very little and gets floored by that product is a hazard on the road due to impairment. So our framework talks about impairment in one way, and that is you should never be impaired at work. You should be never impaired while behind the wheel of a car, and you should never be impaired in a safety, sensitive position. It's the impairment that's an issue, and that's what should be the issue to law enforcement. Is someone on the road, let's take DUI, someone on the road, are you impaired or not? If you're impaired, we need to get you off the street for your safety, for the safety of the public. What does not need to be interrogated at the roadside is what caused that impairment, because impairment could be caused by a stroke, a seizure, a prescription drug used according to the label, a prescription drug misused. It could be caused by a botanical substance, lawful or not, right? If the issue is safety, get that person off the road. What caused that impairment can be secondary, much further down the list than it currently is. And so that brings me back to the intoxicating standard and why our language says intoxicating potential at the labeled dose. And because, chemists do this for a living, I think we can hold all things at once and say, on average, on a bell curve, this chemical profile at its labeled dose has a potential to intoxicate somebody. It has the potential to impair somebody versus this product, its chemical composition probably won't. In fact, it really could not at its labeled dose. And so I hope that illustrates a very practical way to look at the slew of herbal cannabis products under that umbrella to determine at the labeled dose before this goes out to the shelves, before we decide what goes into general retail, what goes through the age-gated specialty, retail model, i.e. the dispensary. Let's investigate based off this chemical composition. What is it liable to do? And then sensibly route it again to general retail or to the age-gated restricted retail specialty shops.
Yeah, and I think something that's been missing, with all the regulations that have been created, since legalization is there hasn't been the input from a clinician, someone who can actually talk about the science.
Hardly ever. Yeah, next to never.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And there, we need to have that information brought to the table so that we can, all come together and create actually like fair regulations, for this product because it is very unique. And so, of course, Dr. Knox, I invite you to come back to dive deeper into the endocannabinoid system and explaining it to the audience on, just how it works in the body so that we can better understand that. But also, what is the best way for the various states that do have legal programs or are getting ready to have legal programs? How can they interact with open materia and what we're trying to do here so that we can really come to a consensus, on how to move forward? We know that there's a ticking time clock. We know this, but right now, like what can the various states do?
If you want to interact with the tool, you can go to www.openmateria.org and begin asking it some questions. So when you get there, you'll see that there's 3 lanes to open materia. Open materia has the open standard, open source, and open record. Open source and the open record, they're not live on the site now, but they speak to the public domain, prior art platform, and longitudinal record keeping, patient-owned data, and for the first time ever, monitoring outcomes based on what exists in the common. So those are 2 areas that we're still working out, but that standard is live. So you can check out the model bill. You can check out the federal bill, and the one live bill for states is Oregon right now. Use the ask feature to ask some questions and then submit your name through that feature. So if you ask it just any old question, it'll answer to the best of its ability, or if it can't, it's honest. Yeah, we can't answer this question yet. Submit your name, submit your question, and we'll be right back with you. So through that ask feature, you could submit a question and push it through to us. We'll receive it and we can get right back to you through that simple mechanism. But what you'll see if you start looking at the different jurisdictions, Alabama at the top, to start with the top alphabetical order, it's not mapped yet. And we call to folks on the ground to get in touch with us if they're interested in seeing their state laws conform to the Whole Plant Act, to a national standard. And the whole idea is to work with stakeholders on the ground, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, to achieve this national standard and be able to show up at the end of this project to be able to show a whole plant act specific to each state that taken together creates that national standard, a federal act that supports, that facilitates where it needs to, that does not compete, but complements those states' acts, so that, again, taken together, we're shipping one national standard that can actually stand up on the international stage as well. Anything else I can say about that? Yeah, I don't think so. But we want to build coalition here, folks. So as an individual, as organizations, we want your participation. We want you to scrutinize, because the whole idea too is that we believe that we can achieve something where everybody sees their thing reflected back to them. I've been working in this space for a long time, and I've always scratched my head because folks talk past each other. They talked around each other. And I'm sitting here saying, there's a scenario where you all get what you want. Let me prove it to you. And I think that's what the whole Plant Act does.
Yeah, and I went ahead and sharing my screen with the openmateria.org website, just so that the audience can see that and how you can interact. But it's really so well done. I know that you're still working on it, but it's really, really amazing. And of course, being you know, the co-chair for the Cannabis, Hemp, and Natural Psychedelics Committee. It's great when I have various states, attend the meetings. So just understand, committee members, I'm going to be sending this on over to you guys so you guys can take a look at it, because, Oregon was the very first state to work on it with Dr. Knox, and it's extremely comprehensive. You can ask all sorts of questions in this little chat bot here, or chat box here. And what we aim to do is, try to have all the different states, Okay. Any last thoughts? Dr. Knox, Dell, Jessica, any last thoughts before we close out the webinar?
None from me.
Okay,
Well,
great.
I just want to say you will be able to link to open materia through my site as well. That this is definitely something that Drug Policy Watch supports. This makes total sense from a community policy standpoint. As a mother, it protects our children in all of the ways that we have been asking for them to be protected, including in their medical access. So, oh, here's my site. Yeah. And now, yeah, if Tweet scrolls down, you'll get down here to the map. And this is interactive. So Tweet, if you click on Oregon, for example, then if you scroll down below it, you'll see that the whole scorecard popped up down here. And I do need to work on that a little, but you can see all of the different topics listed. And if you click on any one of them over on the side over here on the right, and where it says in the brief, that'll take you to the entire brief and then that specific part on it. And then at the very bottom of the page, if you scroll all the way down, it's kind of long. There's a lot to cover for every state. But here we go. This is going to be all of your active bills in the state that have to do anything with all types of drug policy. And you can click on them. If you click on any single bill number, the actual bill, yeah, there you go. It takes you through to LegiScan, where you can read the actual bill text for yourself. So you never have to take anybody's word for it, including mine, because I am also human and wrong. So please feel free to let me know when I am. It does not bother me at all. I think that's, yeah, pretty much it. So between, Dr. Knox gives you the how-to on what to do with it. Mine is showing you where things are at right now. You can take both tools together and figure out what is best for you and your community to move forward.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you everybody for attending our episode 8. We're going to continue. Amy, if you can pull up our next speaker. So we are extremely lucky to be able to secure Rod Kite. He is an attorney, and he's been an attorney really, I think, in the cannabis space just as long as myself, because I met him at a cannabis expo because we were both panelists. So on September 11th, he will be presenting on the guardrails or gatekeepers, the next chapter of hemp, marijuana, and federal reform. So you will get to hear from, an attorney talking about all this craziness that's going on and trying to make sense of everything. And I'm sure there will be changes, even, a month from now. So please make sure that you tune in to September 11th webinar. Next slide, please. And as always, we would love for you to join our Cannabis, Hemp, and Natural Psychedelics Committee. Myself and Jonathan Gerhardt with the New Mexico Environment Department are the co-chairs for the Cannabis Committee, or the Cannabis, Hemp, and Natural Psychedelics Committee. Next slide, please. And how do you join? You can join on our website, afdo.org, or you can also scan the QR code to join the committee. And we will be starting committee meetings in September. So look out for your email invite for that. And thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing such great insights, such great information, and your expertise in the space. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will see you in September.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You.